Strains or deformation? Are these two concepts one and the same thing? Well, today we'll be discovering whether these two concepts which we are referring to as strains and deformation are one and the same thing. The reason why we're looking at this is because guess what? In Russian they translate to one and the same thing, which is deformatia. But then, if we really look at strains and deformation in details, do these two concepts tell us one and the same thing? Let's get down to it. So basically, if you remember, we've discussed deformation throughout most of our videos. We said deformation is defined as the change in size. When we talk of size, we're talking of dimensions, or a change in the shape or form of an object when it has been exposed to a certain load. So basically, when we talk of deformation, we are saying if you have, for example, a metal bar here, and then you start applying, let's say this metal bar is fixed somewhere, there's a fixed beam support here, and then you start applying a certain force. When you start applying a certain force F to this metal bar here, to this beam, after a period of time, you realize that there will be a change. Sorry, let me put this here. There will be a change in the size of this beam. Let's say, for example, at the beginning before you had applied the force to the beam, this was 15 centimeters. And then after you've applied a certain force for a certain period of time, you discover that there will be a very small change. Remember, we talked of the properties of elements of construction. So you might not even notice, but maybe there will be a change. Let's say the beam will become 14.9 centimeters. So this change in this size from 15 to 14.9 is what we are calling deformation. So basically, we are saying deformation is a change in size or shape of an object that has been exposed to a load. Now, we've understood the concept of deformation. We now have to define the concept of strain for us to understand whether these two concepts are one and the same as they are translated in Russian. So for us to understand this is what we'll be looking at. Remember, we are saying as you are applying a force to a certain object, it is undergoing change, either in the shape or in the dimensions of that object. But then, we all know that we are resistant to change. Change might be good, change might be bad. In this case, the change that is happening to the beam is bad, and then the beam does not want this change to occur. So basically what happens is that, let me draw again the beam that we have. We have a beam with a fixed beam support here, and then there is a force that is being applied to this beam. What will happen here is that this beam has been created in such a way that it's supposed to maintain its equilibrium. When we talk of equilibrium, it wants to maintain its shape, it wants to maintain its size and dimensions. So once this force has been applied to this beam, inside this beam, certain forces will start occurring in order to resist this change that is being brought about by this force. These forces that are occurring within this beam are what we are referring to as strains. So basically, when we look at strains and deformation, deformation is change that is brought about by this force. And then the forces that are occurring within this beam to resist this deformation are what we are calling strains. In other words, this is what is happening exactly in the beam. Remember, this beam that we are looking at is a solid body. And then particles within a solid body are closely arranged to each other. what will happen here is that let us assume that we are applying a stress or a tensile force that is pulling this beam apart. Let's say there are two forces here. We're applying this force this side, this force this side. When we start pulling here, the intermolecular space between these two particles will start increasing. But then, these two particles have been created in such a way that they would want to stick close to each other. So the moment you start pulling this beam both ways, this intermolecular space will start increasing between these two atoms or these particles. But then, these particles will start acting in such a way that they're going to produce a certain force in order to resist this increase in what? In length. So they're going to resist this increase in length by creating a certain force between them. This force that is being created in order to resist this increase in length again is what we're referring to as strain. So in conclusion, what are we saying? We are saying deformation is deformation is the change in either the shape or the size of a certain object under an applied load. But then strain is the force that occurs within the beam in order to resist this deformation, in order to resist this change. So basically, in Russian, when you come across strains and deformation, they'll translate to one and the same thing. But then, they mean absolutely two different things. Hope to see you in the next video.